So I know I'm a bit late on this, but let's discuss the brand new McLaren W1, which is made to be the successor of the McLaren P1, which was previously McLaren's flagship car. So as you can see from the image I've provided, they've decided to give the McLaren W1 gull-wing style doors, which is actually something we don't see very often in these sort of hypercars. Usually you're going to see something like scissor doors, butterfly doors, or maybe even dihedral doors, because that's usually what you would see on the hypercar. But this gull-wing door layout is actually pretty creative, and personally I like the look of it because it enhances how good the car looks. Now in terms of similarities, there's not much, but one thing I did notice is that the McLaren W1 has a similar side profile to the McLaren P1, however it has a little more active aero going on for it. You can see that the vent there is bigger to allow more air in, and all this active aero kind of got me thinking that McLaren is probably going to do something to try and distinguish themselves from what others are doing, because a lot of brands lately have been unveiling their new cars, and to have a market you need to distinguish yourself somehow. So what I think McLaren is trying to do is that they're going to be trying and making a sort of track and regular car hybrid type of car, where you can both use it on the track because it's a more track focused car than if you were to have the P1, and you'd be able to drive it on the roads regularly because it's still street legal but not as track focused as to become illegal for the street. And I think that would really distinguish McLaren from what other brands like Ferrari and Bugatti are doing, because neither of them are really putting too much emphasis on the track part from what I know. Now when we do a side-by-side comparison, we can see that the W1's roof scoop is pretty similar to the McLaren P1's, and also that the McLaren W1 seems a little more bare than the McLaren P1. It seems a little less luxury, it seems to have a little less features, because the McLaren P1 seems to have a bigger windshield, it has more windows, but the McLaren W1 seems to be cutting back on that, which I feel like is further adding to my hypothesis of this being a more track-focused successor to the McLaren P1, because McLaren needs to distinguish themselves from the competition. And I feel like that's going to do very well for them, because again, nobody's really focusing on the track at this moment, and customers seem to want this because customers seem to like McLaren's track stuff, especially with their F1 team. Now, I'm sure this is what you are all waiting for, so let's talk about performance. It goes from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 2.7 seconds, it generates 1,258 brake horsepower, and it does this just from the rear wheels, which is actually pretty amazing. So the reason that it's able to do this is obviously because of some very serious suspension technology. Also, they can change the angles to make an absurd amount of downforce, giving the W1 a lot of stopping power, and it's a very lightweight car. Initially, when you're looking at it, you can see that it has a very unique spoiler, and the spoiler can actually go back, and once it does, then that generates a total of 1,000 kilograms of downforce. That's 350 kilograms on the front and an enormous 650 kilograms on the back. Since the car is only 1,399 kilograms, the road to the car is extremely tight, so that car is not going to be lifting off anytime soon. And I think that's very amazing, and that further emphasizes why I think this is going to be a more track-focused type of car. Now, what I think further emphasizes my point and hypothesis of this being a more track-focused successor is that apparently it's going to be a full 3 seconds faster than the McLaren Senna around the Nardo, which is actually very insane because the Senna is definitely a more track-focused car when you think of it. And again, with the downforce, I feel like that emphasizes my point even more. Why would you need so much downforce if a car isn't going to be that track intensive? But they're making an insane amount of downforce with this new hybrid system that they've implemented, and this car is probably going to be one of their fastest cars yet, and it's going to be great around the track, as I've already said. Now, in addition to all of that, it also has a sophisticated suspension suite that McLaren refers to as the Race Active Chassis Control, or RCC for short. It's announced in its third generation, and the RCC3 uses a titanium torsion bar, 3D printed wishbones, and sensors. They're attached to everything and enable the car to transition between drive modes and deploy an active heave element to stiffen suspension when cornering. It has 6-piston caliper brakes at the front, 4-piston caliper package at the back, and the braking system is so powerful that from a 9,200 RPM redline, from 62 miles per hour to 0 in 29 meters, which is absolutely insane. And also, it has titanium, there's carbon fiber, which obviously is going to be there, and the car has a power to weight ratio of 0.899, which is actually a very good power to ratio, because we all know that achieving a 1-to-1 power to weight ratio is very incredible, and getting close to there is still almost as incredible. And I think that further emphasizes why this is going to be a more track-focused McLaren, because with such a power to weight ratio, this advanced system, which this wishbone, 3D printed wishbones, was originally popularized by the Bugatti Bolide, which is a very track-focused car. And so with all of this material and this race central stuff, and along with this power to weight ratio, I feel like this adds to my point of this being a more track centralized McLaren. Now let's talk about the interior. See, the McLaren W1, from what I've noticed, has sort of similar seats to the McLaren Speedtail. Now the McLaren Speedtail, as we know, is slightly less 0 to 60 in acceleration than the McLaren P1, and it hasn't really done much track times like the McLaren P1 has, so it's more of a straight line speed version of the McLaren P1. And the McLaren W1, as we can notice, the seats are kind of integrated into the actual monocoque of the car, which isn't something that is too commonly seen, in my opinion. And we see this more in cars that are more focused for track. So, what this leads me to believe is that this W1 is going to be a sort of mix between the Solus GT and the McLaren P1. And now you may be saying, well, what's the Senna for? You know, that's a more track-focused version of the McLaren P1. Now, what I think is that while the Senna is more track-focused, it's not as track-focused as the W1, as I've already mentioned. And also, the W1 is meant to be a successor to the P1 in every way, meaning that it's completely revolutionizing the technology, right? So they're basically combining new technology in order to make a P1 successor that is closer to the Solus GT than the Senna is, because customers wanted McLaren to make something much more racing oriented rather than something more road oriented. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is that the McLaren W1 is going to act like the McLaren P1 on steroids for the track, and that it's going to be a blend between the McLaren P1, the McLaren F1, and the McLaren Solus GT, and that is reflecting on McLaren's heavy racing heritage. In any case, though, that is just my opinion and what I think of the McLaren W1. I could very well be completely wrong, so this is just me expressing my opinion, so let me know what you think in the comments.